Welcome to Michael, who is like God. That is not a slogan. It is not a claim. It is a question Scripture itself forces us to ask, and the answer Scripture gives us is clear: no one. I am Michael, and this channel exists to let Scripture answer that question honestly, carefully, soberly, and without adding what God has not revealed. So, we begin where Scripture begins. The beginning of beginnings. How Yahweh has chosen to be known. Why we must begin at the beginning. If we want to understand God rightly, we must be willing to return to the beginning. Not because the beginning is simple, but because it is sobering. Most disagreements about God do not actually begin with doctrine. They begin with where we start. And Scripture insists that if we don't start at the beginning, we will misunderstand everything that follows. So this series is not merely about the doctrine of the Trinity, although this is a Trinity series, and it is not simply about correcting theological claims. It is about the God of Scripture and about reality itself, as Scripture reveals it. To see that reality clearly, we must be willing to step back before creation, before theology, before systems, before debates, and ask a more fundamental question. What does Scripture say is true? Before anything else exists at all. Before creation. Because whatever is true there governs everything that comes after. So we turn carefully and deliberately to the beginning before all beginnings. Not the beginning of history, not the beginning of the universe, but the beginning of creation itself. Before there was a universe. Before there was time as we experience it. Before there was matter, space, or life. Scripture tells us that there was God before then. Or more precisely, there was Yahweh. And this matters because Scripture does not allow us to treat God as one part of reality among others. God is not discovered within reality. Reality exists because of God. And this is where Scripture begins. The Bible does not describe a time before God. It does not explain where God came from. It does not tell us how God began, because God did not begin. As Scripture says, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Psalm 90, verse 2. This is not poetry meant to confuse us. It is revelation meant to anchor us. Before anything else exists, Yahweh simply is. He is not caused. He is not derived. He is not assembled. He does not become. He exists in himself. This establishes that God is not part of the created order, but he is the reason the created order exists at all. Scripture is very careful here. It never speaks of multiple self-existent beings. It never speaks of shared sources of reality. It never describes God as one among equals. Instead, Yahweh says, I am Yahweh, and there is no other. Isaiah 45, verse 5. And again, I am Yahweh, who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself. Isaiah 44, verse 24. This language is deliberate. One, alone, by myself. This matters because Scripture is establishing exclusivity at the level of existence itself, not merely at the level of worship. If there were multiple self-existent beings, Scripture would have to explain a lot, like how they differ, how causality is shared, how priority is avoided, and why one is called Yahweh while the others are not. Scripture does none of this. It begins and remains with one. Later, Scripture tells us something essential about Yahweh. It tells us that Yahweh is spirit in John 4, verse 24. This tells us what kind of being God is, not what he is made of. Scripture never describes God in terms of matter, physical form, composition, or substance. Those categories belong to us, to creation, inside creation. This is foundationally important because it prevents us from treating God as a thing within a system he creates. Yahweh is not part of the system he creates because God is spirit. Scripture uses images or imagery rooted in our created reality to help us understand his presence and activity. We are told of breath, wind, fire, light, filling, pouring, moving, resting. For example, the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, Genesis 1, verse 2. These are not scientific descriptions. They are revealed images. Scripture gives us imagination, not mechanics. And this distinction matters. God is not these things. He is not wind, fire, water, or light as created substances. As we've already said, he is uncreated, self-existing being. Instead, Scripture shows us that God uses creation and acts within and through creation to make himself known to us. These images describe how God interacts, not what God is made of. And when Scripture speaks of God as light, it is not identifying him with created light. God is uncreated light, the source and giver of light. And light itself is something he later speaks into creation. So God illuminates like light without being created light. He reveals, exposes, and gives life without becoming part of what he has made. And all this creation never collapses into God's identity, and God never becomes part of creation. This matters because Scripture is teaching us how to know God without turning him into an object of analysis or a component of the created world. So there is a rule we must respect. Don't turn imagination into explanation. The Bible shows us how God relates and how God is not how God is constructed. Scripture also speaks of God as one who knows, wills, plans, and speaks. God says through the prophet, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways," in Isaiah 55, verse 8. And Scripture repeatedly tells us, "And God said." Before creation, there is no audience. There is nothing yet to receive. And yet Scripture presents Yahweh as a God who speaks. This is important because Scripture affirms God's personal agency without explaining his internal mechanics. It does not explain how this is so. It just simply tells us that it is so. We affirm what Scripture affirms, and then we stop where Scripture stops. But then Scripture tells us something staggering. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1, verse 1. And later, by the word of Yahweh, the heavens were made, for he spoke, and it came to be. Psalms 33, verse 6 and 9. And again, what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Hebrews 11, verse 3. Scripture presents creation as coming into existence by command, through word, through speech. Not from existing matter, not from divine substance, not by emanation or division. This matters because it establishes an absolute distinction between creator and creation. Yahweh speaks and reality begins. Yahweh creates without becoming creation and without sharing his being. Later thinkers would ask, what is God made of? What is his structure? How is his being organized? Scripture, it never asks these questions. This is important because Scripture is not incomplete. It is just intentional. Scripture begins with revelation, not analysis. It tells us who God is, what God does, and how God relates. And it calls that enough. Only later does God reveal his personal name. I am Yahweh, Exodus 3, verses 14 through 15. The name does not create the reality. The name identifies the one who already is, was, and always will be. This matters because the being precedes the naming, and revelation follows reality, not the other way around. Yahweh is the everlasting God, made known to us by revelation, not discovered by speculation. Everything that follows in Scripture flows from this beginning. One God, one source, one self-existent reality. And if this foundation shifts, everything built on it shifts with it. Any doctrine that comes later must honor this starting point, and we don't move forward until we are grounded here. This is where Scripture begins, not with explanations, not with philosophy, but with Yahweh himself. Everlasting, uncaused, one. So in the next episode, we will follow Scripture's order and direction and examine Yahweh as the source of all things. Until then, let Scripture speak, let God be true, and let the beginning remain the beginning. Again, I'm Michael, and thank you for listening.